So you think of the areas of significance of Papillion, a lot of it started with, I would say, Veterans Park. And over time, Veterans Park has become a Blue Star Memorial, which is a national recognition. We've created the Honor Wall, so any veteran in Sarpy County can have their name on the wall and be honored. We have an obelisk, and on that we honor a Congressional Medal of Honor winner from the Civil War, Jacob Miller. We have a killed in action from World War I. We have a missing in action from Vietnam, and then we have 2 killed in action from Afghanistan. Now the ones with Afghanistan, we've actually renamed their childhood streets. So Semper and Naziska, if you go to their childhood streets, you'll see their names there. And then in addition, we did another project at Veterans Park to honor POW MIA KIA, and we have some sculptures there. And that's also a Gold Star Memorial, which is a national program. Probably most significant recently is the Vietnam Memorial, first memorial for the state of Nebraska that's dedicated to Vietnam, and it's the last state in the nation to have one. We did a project last year with the Honor and Remember organization where they're trying to create what they call the Nebraska Memorial Forest. They want to honor every fallen Nebraskan with a specific tree. We have a grove of 200 trees at Prairie Queen. That memorial, the Gold Star Memorial, and Vietnam Memorial have all been recognized at a national level on the Purple Heart Trail, which is a program of the Military Order of the Purple Heart. And after all of that, Military Order of the Purple Heart awarded Papillion a Purple Heart City. So the Veterans Park, it's important for a lot of things, but one of it, I think, is just how it started small, and it just shows a lot of what cooperation amongst groups can do. It literally started with the Papillion Garden Club wanting to plant a flower bed in the corner of a park, and then the Papillion Junior Women's Clubs came and said, well, could we put a flagpole in the flower bed? Sure. And then between those two projects, the Garden Club worked to getting the Blue Star Memorial recognized. And then it was from that, some discussion said, it's starting to become something. And that's when we renamed it Veterans Park. And then pretty soon we started adding other design elements. The Papillion Community Foundation came along and said, we want to do the Honor Wall project. And it just kept growing and growing and growing, but it was the small incremental things in partnership with other organizations. All of the flags behind us were the American Legion saying, we want to play a part. So they raised the funds for all of the flags. Woodmen of the World funded the flags that went on the poles. OPPD came along and buried power lines to clean the area up. A lot of community cooperation and pride really has developed this, and I think every year over the last 10 years there's been some incremental small project that's led us to what we've got now. Personally to me, early on when I became mayor, about 2010 and 2011 is when Papillion had the 2 gentlemen that were killed in action. When Mark Naziska was killed in action, it struck me a little bit of what's the community's role in honoring somebody that was just killed in action. And that led to the naming of the street. And you saw the pride the family and the community had around that. But then it was only 8 months later that Joe Semper was killed in action. And when his dad escorted him from the airport to Papillion, you just saw the community pride in welcoming him home and then able to talk to the family of what that meant. That then led to us renaming his street. And I think that just raised the awareness of how important it is that we don't forget. There was a group of Vietnam vets were the ones that recognized Nebraska did not have a memorial, and they spent about 3 years on design and site selection. Somebody said, why don't you go visit with Papillion? And so we quickly learned about the project and almost immediately said, we want to support this. We identified the site at Sumter Amphitheater, and the city signed a 50-year agreement of we want to be partners and we want to donate the land. The helicopter was in the design before we got involved. So the Vietnam vets that said they want a memorial, anybody who's aware of the Vietnam War, the Huey helicopter is just iconic to the Vietnam War. But I think the first time that helicopters were used at that level, it has an iconic sound. It's just part of Vietnam. So when it was in the memorial, it made sense. But then what really became cool about it is, where do you find a Huey helicopter? It was through some work of the Memorial Foundation that they were led to a group in Bennington, Vermont that had one. But then they weren't able to raise the funds for their memorial, so they donated the Huey. And then it was shortly after that we started finding the original crew. To say you've got a memorial for Vietnam with a Huey helicopter and the original crew now as part of that memorial, that's pretty unique. If you are a military individual that wanted to be buried in a national cemetery. I think you probably either had to go to Maxwell, Nebraska, or Fort Leavenworth, I think probably was the next closest. So you were 6 to 8 hours away if you wanted to be buried in a national cemetery. This is a military community off at Air Force Base, big population base. To me, it just made sense to have one here, but it took a long time to get it identified. So to have all the way from the National Cemetery to the Vietnam Memorial, Veterans Park, to the city streets, I think it just says that we are a military community and honors the history of how many people have lived here. A lot of our population is retired military, worked at the base, ended up wanting to stay and retired here. We're a military community and we're proud of it, and we want to honor our veterans.